Lions Pride, let's roll. Welcome to the den where it doesn't matter if you're a Lions fan, but I really think you should be one. And in today's video, we'll be going over my picks for week one of the NFL season. And we shall see if I'm a sidekick with my picks or if I'm going to end up in the bottom half of pick'ems again. Starting today with the Steelers Falcons game. The Falcons are an extremely hyped up team this season, mostly because of the Kirk Cousins acquisition that happened on the offseason. Also, getting a new head coach in Raheem Morris is going to be what everybody is hoping an extremely good pickup. But back to the Kirk Cousins thing, everybody was really upset with how Desmond Ritter played last year. He was probably a bottom 30 quarterback in the NFL. So having Kirk Cousins, who is probably about above average in the quarterback carousel type stuff, should be really good. And even if Kirk Cousins has lingering issues with that Achilles strain, everybody's hoping Michael Penix will do pretty good. This season will be very interesting to see if Drake London and Kyle Pitts can kind of have a breakout seasons. I mean, Kyle Pitts going fifth overall, Drake London's your main receiver, and neither of them had terribly good seasons last year. That's probably because of Arthur Smith, mainly. But it'll be interesting to see how effective they can be with a new quarterback and to see if they fit better in Raheem Morris' system. However, going back to both Kirk Cousins and Raheem Morris, having both a new quarterback and new head coach at the same time can spell some issues for a team. Kirk Cousins is 36, coming off an Achilles tear, and Raheem Morris was not exactly considered a hot commodity on the coaching carousel this year. But it'll be interesting to see how they come out week one, if there's some issues, if they're not as fluid as you want them to be. We'll see how that ends up going. With the Steelers, I think this game for them is going to come down to whether or not Russell Wilson is still a starting caliber quarterback in the NFL. I think he can be successful in this offense, especially if you can get Najee Harris running the ball effectively, because that increases the amount of play action capabilities that their offense can have, which will make Russell Wilson more effective. That was one of the biggest issues with the Denver Broncos last year, is their play action just wasn't that good. But he has a lot to prove this upcoming season. For the defense related to that, their defense should be really good. The defense in the AFC South is always an extremely good quality. So I'm not too worried about that. And it'll be good to test it against a Falcons offense, which everyone is assuming will probably be pretty high powered this year. Going into that, my pick for this week, I will be taking the Pittsburgh Steelers to win. I do not think this game is going to be a blowout. I also am not entirely sure if this game is going to be very high scoring. But I think in this first week, the main reason for that is the fact that Kirk Cousins is not going to meld well in both a new offensive style and with new players. I think it's going to be a little too much in a actual game proven setting for them to get perfect the first time. I think this offense will be good at the end of the year. I just think for the first couple weeks, it'll be a little bit more rusty, is the best way to put it. So I think I'm going to go with the Pittsburgh Steelers to win, mostly through their defensive efforts and Russell Wilson making some weird throws. Next on the list, you've got the Arizona Cardinals taking on the Buffalo Bills. And I think this game should be more interesting than people are letting it out to be at the beginning of the season. The Cardinals, they're taking a lot of praise this offseason for getting Kyler Murray a new weapon in Marvin Harrison Jr., and that should make the offense look a little bit better. And if Jonathan Gannon has proved anything, it's that he knows how to make teams tough. You were very competitive last year. The record does not represent how good that team looked at times. And you even had really big games beating teams like the Cowboys early in the year and the Eagles later on. I would say you still have some weapons back there. James Conner's good. Your tight end room, little to be desired, but it's not terrible. And since you've got Kyler Murray back for hopefully the entire season, you've got a mobile quarterback. So even if that offensive line has some issues, you probably won't take the same amount of sacks as you did if you had someone like Bryce Young, who's not as mobile in the NFL. For the Bills, you lost a lot of veterans this offseason, which, may end up being a problem later in the season, especially on the defensive side of the ball. But with a QB like Josh Allen, I can see that he will cover a lot of holes that may have been there if you had a lesser QB in that position. It'll be fun to see how players like Dalton Kincaid and Khalil Shakir end up playing without Stephon Diggs being the number one, hoping that those two can make a step forward. Dalton Kincaid coming in his second season had a really good rookie campaign. Khalil Shakir, you haven't seen as much as you want from him, but even in that latter half of the year, he did pretty decent when Stephon Diggs' production was really far down. I think this game will be pretty fun, and I could see it being pretty high scoring, especially if the Bills' defense doesn't end up playing as well without their veterans. As for my pick, I'm going to stick with the safe option here, and I'm going to go with the Buffalo Bills to win the game. I think the Cardinals will be competitive this year, but their team has too many questions coming into this game. And I see Josh Allen as just being that step up over Kyler Murray. I see their defense being a tad bit better, and I see their offensive weapons being better than that of what the Cardinals have. I'm going to stick with the Bills for this time around. Next up, you have the Tennessee Titans taking on the Chicago Bears. The Bears are an extremely hyped up team coming into this season by the media purely due to the fact that they got Caleb Williams as the number one overall pick, and they ended up getting Rome Odunze as well in the draft. You also have to think getting things like Keenan Allen and then DeAndre Swift to make that offense look really good. The questions you're going to have with this team is that offensive line going to be able to stand up? And will Caleb Williams be able to compete as a starting NFL caliber quarterback? He did have some question marks in college, fumbled a lot, wasn't very good with protecting the ball, and he tends to break pockets a little too early, in my opinion, which might be a good thing behind that Chicago Bears offensive line. As for the Titans, the media has no care about this team this year, which doesn't make a ton of sense to me, honestly. I get that they have some holes. Defense doesn't look exactly perfect, but they did try to shore that up by making a trade with the Chiefs this year to get L'Jarius Sneed in that secondary and getting Calvin Ridley and paying him a bunch of money to make both sides of the ball better this season is what you're hoping for. I think the main reason that people aren't taking them seriously is due to the fact that people don't believe in Will Levis. If you're a Titans fan, you of course have to pray that Will Levis is in fact a starting caliber quarterback in the NFL and can help you make it to, if not the playoffs, a winning record this year. As for my pick this week, I am in fact going to take the Tennessee Titans to upset in this game. I think the Bears are going to be good this season. I don't want to say that they're going to be terrible. I just think they will get out to a slow start, purely due to the fact that Caleb Williams is a rookie quarterback. No matter how good you look as a prospect, it doesn't matter if, first off, I don't believe in Matt Eberflus to develop quarterbacks, but also you have to learn an NFL-style offense and play against an NFL-style defense, which is completely different than what you play in college. Look at Bryce Young, for instance. So this week, I am going with the Titans because Caleb Williams needs a little more time to develop. On to another game with a lot of interest behind it is the New England Patriots taking on the Cincinnati Bengals. This game is going to be interesting for a couple different reasons. The first one is the Patriots are starting a new head coach since the Bill Belichick era, which I think is over 2 decades long. Gerard Mayo will be making his season debut as a head coach in the NFL against probably a really tough team in the Cincinnati Bengals. We're going to see how he does. I think he's a defensive-minded head coach, just like Bill Belichick was. So we'll have to see how Jacoby Brissett looks behind an offensive line that's not that good. Of course, you've got Drake May in the back, but he's most likely going to be developing. So what you're hoping is that Jacoby Brissett stays healthy for most of the season, which could be a bit of an issue behind that offensive line. But you're hoping he stays healthy, and that lets Drake May develop. As for the Bengals, it's a welcome back party for Joe Burrow. You have to hope that all of the lingering issues that were happening with Joe Burrow are completely gone now. You have to hope that he's able to stay healthy for the entire season and that your team can get to the playoffs once again. But behind that, you've got Jamar Chase and T. Higgins still on the team. Offensive line should be improved, we're hoping. The defense, that's going to be a bit of a weird one. The defense wasn't very good last year, so you have to hope your D coordinator and head coach can get more out of that team. With my pick, I am still going to be taking the Cincinnati Bengals over the New England Patriots. I think the Pats are going to struggle this year, and that's mainly due to the fact that they just don't have that much on offense, and their defense is, whilst good, is downgraded because of certain signings that have happened recently. That offensive production from the Bengals should be really good, and even with a lackluster defense, I don't think the Patriots' offense is going to be able to do much against it. So I am going to be taking the Bengals in this game. Now, onto an AFC South matchup between the Indianapolis Colts and the Houston Texans. This game should be a pretty good spot because, remember last year, with Gardner Minshew leading the fold, they barely missed the playoffs in Indianapolis, and the Texans ended up going and beating the Browns. So, what you're going to be wanting to see from the Texans, you want to make sure that CJ Stroud is still looking the same that he did at the end of the season, throwing for crazy amounts of touchdowns with very little turnovers. Now, you've got to hope that the sophomore slump that everybody talks about constantly does not occur with CJ Stroud. The offense has got to look the same or better. Of course, you've got the additions of Stephon Diggs. You've got Joe Mixon now as a running back. I think that the offense should be the same or better. You just have to hope the offensive line stays together. And you hope that the wide receiver room does not take a dip because of Stephon Diggs' personality. Of course, when he moves to new places, he tends to do pretty good. When he moved to Buffalo, he had a really good productive season with Josh Allen. So you hope that kind of happens with CJ Stroud, that his change of scenery got him into that good spot. The defense, on the other hand, not much took place to improve that defense. They have a defensive rookie of the year from last year, but the defense didn't change a whole lot, it didn't feel like. Of course, part of that is due to the fact that they did not have a first round pick this year. For the Colts, you need to make sure that Anthony Richardson looks a down-tuned version of what Cam Newton was. Able to run properly, not get hurt, throw the ball into nice tight spirals, and make sure that that ball is getting things. And he shows no lasting effect from the injury that took place last season. As for your defense, you have to hope that defensive line is able to crush quarterbacks so quick that they can't throw the ball, because your secondary did not improve this offseason. You just re-signed people. Because your secondary was so awful, is the best way I can put it, last season, you need to hope that the pass rush in your thing, because of the additions of Laiatu Latu, that your secondary, it won't be affected too much by that. But for this game, I will be taking the Houston Texans. I think they did more in the offseason, and the fact that CJ Stroud is now coming into his second year will show that he has had more improvement, a second camp to go through, and that he will be playing very well. So in this game, I am going to be taking the Texans, but I would not be surprised if the Colts inch it out. And now we'll move on to two teams with very high expectations coming into this season's in a game between the Jacksonville Jaguars taking on the Miami Dolphins. Two of those Florida teams you have to look out for. For the Jaguars, this is a very prove it season for Trevor Lawrence. Of course, he did get paid in the offseason, so he doesn't have to prove a ton. Even if he plays like crap and gets cut, he'll still get paid money. But for Jaguars fans, you really need T-Law to show that his payday was not a mistake, that he's able to make those throws and look like he did in the first 8 weeks of the season instead of that latter half where it looked like everything fell apart. You can blame that on a few things, but you just have to hope that he can keep that same consistency. Your offense also needs to figure out who your number one weapon is. Is it ETN? Is it one of your receivers? Is it your tight end? Is it Trevor Lawrence on his legs? You have to figure out something, because the loss of Calvin Ridley, even if he wasn't all that productive, still leaves a hole in that offensive room. There's not a whole much else to talk about with the Jaguars. The biggest issue here is going to be, is Trevor Lawrence worth the money he was paid? Of course, your defense, while not terribly good, is also not terribly bad. It's sort of a middle of the ground defense. So you have to hope that offense can take the step and that Trevor Lawrence can elevate himself to a spot of elite quarterback play. For the Dolphins, same thing in that situation. Tua gets paid this offseason, and you have to hope that that also was not a mistake. I think there's a bit more proven with Tua. He has led the league in passing yards, made the playoffs last year, did lose in Kansas City, but we won't hold that against him because that was an extremely outlier type of game with how cold it was. You also have to hope that Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Devon Achane, and Raheem Mostert are able to keep the same production they had last year. If Raheem Mostert can keep the same production, you'll be extremely happy because of how many touchdowns he ended up pushing in. Devon Achane will also be extremely good to have going because of how fast he is as a running back. Tyreek Hill is most likely going to continue to be, and Jalen Waddle got paid this offseason. We'll see if he still has the same motivation to keep moving forward. As for your defense, you did lose some pieces this year. Jordan Poyer was out. So you just have to hope that that defense can show consistency as even a middle of the road defense with a high powered offense. You also have to hope that getting rid of Vic Fangio will prevent a lot of those injuries that took place last year. It's always known that Vic Fangio happens to be a more physical and happens to cause a lot more injuries, generally speaking, when he is the defensive coordinator for a team. So you'll have to hope that that will decrease the overall injury production that happened last season for the Dolphins. For this game particularly, though, I will be taking the Miami Dolphins. I feel like they always start really, really, really well, and they're in Florida either way, so it should be a nice, warm game for them, which means all of their twitchy, fast fiber guys can move and work around the same way they were at the beginning of the season. They also have no injuries on that offense that I know of, so it should be a rather interesting game, but I will be taking the Dolphins this time around. Now, onto an NFC South matchup between the Carolina Panthers and the New Orleans Saints. I won't lie to you, this is one of those divisions that I do not pay a ton of attention to on the bottom half of it, so the New Orleans Saints and the Panthers, purely due to the fact that I do not believe the teams did much in the offseason to inspire confidence in their players. For the Panthers, for instance, getting Dave Canales was a good play, and even getting people like Xavier Legette in the draft was a good play. But overall, your offensive line is still not very good. Your skill players could use some work. You don't have a good running back. Your defense is going to be horrendous this season. And since Dave Canales has an offensive mind, the defense probably won't improve too much unless his coordinator is just that good. We'll see if Bryce Young can make a step forward with Dave Canales as his head coach. But I would say that this team is going to be in for a very, very, very rough season. As for the Saints, you're not in too much better of a situation, I think. Last year, you had a lot of stuff go your way, and you still didn't end up in the playoffs. I think keeping Dennis Allen as your head coach was just a terrible decision by the organization. I don't think he's proven enough in the years that he's been in New Orleans that he is an NFL head coach. There's also the fact that Derek Carr has not inspired confidence last year. He wasn't very good. He was kind of hot at the end of the season, throwing 14 touchdowns in the last 5 games, but you have to hope that that continues, but that is not a track record that he has. You do have some good pieces. You've got a couple players that you really are excited that are on the team, but your defense is not that good either. But there are definitely more questions than you have answers on this team, so it should be a rough season realistically. And you're just hoping that your organization finally realizes that you need to get out of that cap purgatory that you've been stuck in for so long at the end of this season. I think that would be a very winnable and very good situation to be put in. However, for my pick in this game, I am going to be taking the New Orleans Saints this time round. I think it'll be a low scoring game. I don't think the offenses will be able to do much, and that's mainly due to the fact that I don't think Carolina has enough pieces around Bryce Young to succeed, and I don't believe that Derek Carr is a starting caliber quarterback anymore in the NFL. But the fact is the Saints have better skill players overall, so even without that, Tyson Bagent can come in and they can throw the ball to Amari Cooper or whatever they need to do. I think their skill players will be better in this game. So I would hedge any bets that you're going to put on them scoring a tad bit more points against a lackluster Panthers defense. Next up, you've got the Minnesota Vikings taking on the New York Giants. Both of these teams are, in my opinion, not going to be very fun for the individual fan bases to watch. The Vikings having heartbreak in the offseason as J.J. McCarthy was injured before he could even take one snap of NFL football. Played really, really good in that preseason game, then had a knee injury that he had to get repaired and will be out for the season. So now you have to start Sam Darnold, who has never really inspired confidence as a starting caliber quarterback in the NFL. Even with that, though, you still have some of the best skill players in the league. You've got Aaron Jones as your running back. You've got Justin Jefferson, an absolutely amazing wide receiver who is probably the best receiver in the NFL. And you've got TJ Hawkinson, who is most likely in a top 5 consideration for tight ends in the league. Your skill player is really good. Your offensive line is not terrible. I would say it's probably better than most people think. The defense, there is improvement last year, but it did have problems against deep balls and certain types of teams' run plays. I think you'll have a good season overall. Overall, your team is not bad. I just think that quarterback position is going to be a bit of a issue. For the Giants, the addition of Malik Neighbors should be a big boon to Daniel Jones's arsenal. And you have a couple options in your tight end room. You've got a couple options for your receiving. But overall, the Giants do not have a very good offense, especially consider that offensive line did not get much better this season. I think Daniel Jones is still a question mark as well. I can't really say that he's a terrible quarterback because he didn't play enough games, but in the games he did play, he did not play that would inspire confidence. While I don't want to hate on Daniel Jones too much, his production at the beginning of last season just was not up to snuff as a starting NFL caliber quarterback. Part of that was also probably due to the fact that his offensive line was not good and he did not have weapons. I don't think you'll have as bad a season as people are saying you'll have, but it probably won't inspire confidence for many Giants fans throughout the season. As for my pick this week, I am going to go with the Minnesota Vikings to win this game. I think even with Sam Darnold as your quarterback, that the Vikings just have too much power on that offense and the offensive line is better, that Sam Darnold will not lose these games for you. Daniel Jones, on the other hand, might lose games for you if he is not running like he used to. So I'm going to go with the Vikings, even though it does pay me to choose an NFC North team to win the game. Now we're on to an AFC West matchup in both the Las Vegas Raiders and the Los Angeles Chargers. Now, let's be completely honest about this. People may not be talking about this game, but they should be. This game should be extremely hyped. You've got a Raiders team that, with the addition of Antonio Pierce, Gardner Minshew, Christian Wilkins, should be a rather competitive team in the AFC West. I think this bolstered the AFC West's overall hardships that's going to take place this season. I think with the additions of Gardner Minshew as your quarterback, that is an upgrade objectively to Jimmy Garoppolo, and based on the fact that Antonio Pierce picked him, is a better choice than Aiden O'Connell. Also, having Antonio Pierce in the locker room in general, which was chosen by the players, should be a boost to both the culture and chemistry that this team ends up having throughout the season. At the end of the season last year, you saw a boon to the overall morale within the locker room when Josh McDaniels was out and Antonio Pierce was in. So you have to hope that that continues through. and will be a very, very, very competitive year because they picked the right head coach. As for the Los Angeles Chargers, they made a big pickup this offseason in the head coaching department by hiring Jim Harbaugh off of the Michigan Wolverines. They already have a good quarterback in Justin Herbert, so you don't have to worry about that. You may need to worry a little bit depending on if the injury he sustained in camp is still affecting him in some way, shape, or form. The other issue you're going to have to worry about with that is that Lad McConkey is really the only receiver that he has that should be consistent. Quentin Johnston did not make a good impression last year, and your wide receiver 3, if Quentin Johnston isn't the wide receiver 3, doesn't inspire confidence that Justin Herbert will be able to throw to him consistently, especially against corners in the NFL. However, your offensive line should be really, really good, which should allow Justin Herbert more time to throw when they decide to do it, or they can continue to use both Gus Edwards and the other running back that they have to continue to pummel defensive lines into the ground. This will also be a really good test for the Raiders' defensive line to see if that defensive line can sustain that much run. For my pick in this game, I am going to be taking the Las Vegas Raiders to take the win. I think with how good their defense should be and the overall questions I have about the Chargers offense, especially with the fact Justin Herbert may not be in full competing status, and the fact that their overall vibe says that they're not going to be able to throw the ball very well, I think that the defense can hold that team together better than the Chargers offense will be able to. Now onto a game that I will be watching extremely closely in the latter half of the day is between the Denver Broncos and the Seattle Seahawks. The Broncos are being projected to be one of the worst teams in the NFL this season, which, to be fair, is understandable due to the fact that they lost Russell Wilson and that cap hit is going to be ridiculous this offseason. However, if Sean Payton can get a good amount of production out of Bo Nix and show that Bo Nix will be a quarterback for the Broncos for the time being, I think that they will be able to win more games than people think they will, and that they will not be a bottom tier team in the NFL. I think they have good pieces. Courtland Sutton, they've got their running backs, their new running back, Audric Estime, who should be a power back and should destroy defensive lines over time. The defense in general improved a lot after 70 points got dropped on them. Of course, losing people like Justin Simmons is going to hurt, but keeping PS2 will be a big boon to that defense overall. For the Seahawks, you have a new head coach in Mike Macdonald, who most people believe is a defensive genius and will make your entire defense much improved. Of course, with the Seahawks defense in particular, you're wanting that rush defense to get about middle of the pack instead of on the bottom bit of the NFL. Your offense overall was already good last year. Geno Smith, still some questions there. Make sure that he stays healthy through the entire season and that he can repeat how he played in 2022, getting them to the playoffs. DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, and JSN should be a very, very, very elite wide receiver trio. And then you also have to remember you have Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet in the backfield, so you have a really good running back duo to play with. For my pick, I am going to take the Seattle Seahawks. While I don't think the Denver Broncos will be terrible, I do have a sneaking suspicion that the Seahawks could be vying to win the NFC West, especially if the San Francisco 49ers and Rams are also as competitive as I see them to be this year. So I think for overall, I'm going to take the Seattle Seahawks to beat the Denver Broncos week 1. Next up, we have a powerhouse matchup between the Dallas Cowboys and the Cleveland Browns. Now, this is going to be a very interesting game for a couple different reasons. First off is the individual in the announcer box this time around will be the debut of Tom Brady as an announcer, which should be fun to hear his insight into how the game is going offensively and defensively. Now, we'll get into the Cowboys real quick as to why this game should be a telltale sign for how this team is going to play this year. You have to hope that even without signing Dak Prescott and Micah Parsons, that the team is able to recreate the same production they had last year. Of course, losing guys like Tyron Smith and offensive pieces all over is going to be a bit of an issue. Tony Pollard being gone and being back to Zeke means you are not going to have a run game this year, so you have to hope the Dak CD connection ends up being just as good as it was last year. With CD getting paid, that could be the case, but Dak probably has some issues. The fact that he's gone through a second time that he is now having to deal with Jerry Jones bullcrap. So you have to hope that that offense can stay clicking like it was. The other thing is making sure that defense does not allow a crazy amount of points to Deshaun Watson and the Browns. Overall, they were really good against bad teams offensively last year, but the moment they had to play better teams, it was a bit of an issue, of course, against the Lions, which I don't want to talk about. On to the Browns. Now, here's the main thing with them. You're going to want to see that that defense stays the exact same as it was last year. As far as I know, there haven't been a ton of moves that would have caused that defense to get worse over the offseason. But defenses are extremely hard to keep as physical and demanding as they were last season. The offense, on the other hand, has always been a bit of an issue for the Browns, even when Baker Mayfield was there. The Browns' offense is going to have to rely on Deshaun Watson actually doing his job and staying healthy this season. I think this first game will be a bit of an interesting one. He'll be shaking off some cobwebs because he didn't play 2 seasons ago and he got injured last season. So you have to hope you can get some of that same Texans MVP type of Deshaun Watson that we had then, and that he gets into no more trouble and doesn't have to get sit out an entire season again. You've got good pieces, David Njoku, Amari Cooper, all sorts of different things that are going to be very good for this team. So I would say overall, this team is going to be decent, and you just have to hope that all the defensive stuff that happened last year can continue on to this year for a better playoff run. Overall, for the win in this game, I am going to be taking the Cleveland Browns win week 1. And the main reasons for that is that I think the atmosphere for the Dallas Cowboys coming into week 1 is going to be a little bit more negative. They lost some key players. They haven't re-signed their two of their biggest players, so it's going to be a bit of an issue for this team to stay competitive, in my honest opinion. The next game we'll be talking about will be a game between the Washington Commanders and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. In the offseason, the Commanders did a bunch to make sure that their team could be a bit better. They made every offseason signing they have. They got their new quarterback in Jaden Daniels, who will be the week 1 starter. So you're hoping that him as a mobile quarterback is able to prevent any injuries and doesn't end up like Anthony Richardson did last year by underestimating how strong defensive members of an NFL team are. The other thing, you've got Zach Ertz, which will be a very good veteran tight end who should be able to hold it down catching from Jaden Daniels. The other one is Terry McLaurin. You've got him. You've got Gabe Davis. So you should have a relatively good receiving line. You've also got Brian Robinson Jr. and Austin Eckler, who should, while not be elite, be able to run the ball effectively behind a Dan Quinn offense. Speaking of the defense, Dan Quinn will make that defense much, much better. Of course, you were dead last year, so it's hard to get much worse than that. You can stay the same, but with Dan Quinn as a defensive mind being there, I doubt you'll end up being very bad this year. I would say even if you're able to increase by, I don't know, 10 to 22, it still is an unbelievable increase. And with an offense which I think will be rather good this year, you could have an extremely good year. As for the Buccaneers, you really just re-signed people this year, re-signing a good cornerback, making sure that both Mike Evans and Baker Mayfield stayed. All you did was really try to keep the band together and make the chemistry flow into the next year. Your offense should be good, but the main issue you're going to have with this team is the fact that the Falcons are also going to be rather competitive this year, mostly due to the fact of offseason trades that they made this season. For my pick, I think personally I am going to go with the Buccaneers to win this game this week. And the main reason is their defense was really good last season. Rush defense in particular was extremely good. The Commanders coming with a brand new head coach and a brand new quarterback, it can always lead to be some issues in that first couple weeks. Probably not fully ready to play against a defense that should be as good as the Bucs are going to be. So I think I'm going to go with the Buccaneers in week 1. And the final game in the Sunday slate of games will be the Detroit Lions taking on the Los Angeles Rams. Both teams coming off of seasons that were very good compared to what people thought. Everyone thought the Lions was only going to make it to the playoffs and potentially win a game. Ended up going to the NFC Championship game. And everybody thought that the Rams would be a bottom team in the NFL. Ended up going 10-7 and making the playoffs last season by the emergence of Puka Nacua and Matthew Stafford playing really well. So looking into this one, you're going to want that sort of thing to keep going. You're going to want Cooper Kupp to come back from injury that he was sustained last season and make sure that him and Puka Nacua are a 1-2 wide receiver combo that is unbelievable and that the offensive line continues to get better. You got Jonah Jackson from the Lions in the offseason who should help that offensive line stay really good and keep Matthew Stafford on his feet. As for the defense, losing Aaron Donald is going to be a massive issue that you're going to have to try to figure out. Figuring out who is that number 1 on that defensive line to see who can get the most pressure and disrupt the quarterback as much as possible. Your secondary shouldn't be bad, but you'll have to see how that is affected by not having the same pass rush that you had with Aaron Donald. Moving to the Lions' main issue last year was the secondary, and they hit it hard 4 secondary pieces in both free agency and the draft, getting players like Carlton Davis, Amik Robertson, Terrion Arnold, and Ennis Rakestraw Jr. Those 4 players should hopefully shore up a secondary, specifically cornerbacks, that was rather weak last year. Also, retaining people like Kirby Joseph, Ifatu Melanfonwu, those guys, and moving Brian Branch to the safety position and the nickel position should allow that secondary to be much better this season. Of course, with the offense, we lost Josh Reynolds, but ended up getting a player in Tim Patrick, who, based on what Broncos players are saying, when he is healthy, has some of the surest hands in the NFL. Of course, signing Penei Sewell, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Taylor Decker, Jared Goff, all of these people to contracts in the offseason to make sure our offense stays together. Retaining Ben Johnson is also a big part of this. The Lions should be an extremely competitive and vying for the 1 seed in the NFC this season. On the other hand of that, the Rams will also be vying for the NFC West this season if they can keep everything together like they were last season. Very competitive teams. This is going to be a barn burner of a game. But for my main picks, and of course there's a bit of bias in this, I have the Lions coming out on top. I think the Lions were able to keep their entire team together, besides a few pieces on the offense, and then improve those, but also increasing the overall effectiveness of what that defensive secondary is going to be. I will take that over the Rams' issues that they have with we don't know how that defensive line is going to look, and we don't know how the secondary is going to be affected by that. In the end of it, I am going to be taking the Lions to win this game. Last but certainly not least is the New York Jets taking on the San Francisco 49ers on Monday Night Football, the final game of week 1 of the NFL season. So excited to see this game. On the Jets side of things, I'm extremely excited to see how this offense ends up showing up this year. Of course, Aaron Rodgers is back. You have to hope that he stays healthy throughout the entire season and 4 plays in doesn't get his ankle snapped again. I mean, you already have Garrett Wilson. You've got Breece Hall. Adding more to that offensive line to protect him. Keeping that offense in a position where Aaron Rodgers can succeed will be very, very good. Aaron Rodgers can soar up a lot of holes, but the offensive line is what protects him. And luckily for him, they really hard focus that. Getting Mike Williams as well should help if he can stay healthy. As for that defense, you know your defense is going to be good. That defensive line is amazing. Sauce Gardner as your defensive back, and that defensive backfield in general is just phenomenal. I mean, they were an extremely good team. With Zach Wilson, they went 7-10, so I could see this team being very, very good with a competent quarterback behind center. As for the San Francisco 49ers, I won't lie, I've been nothing but annoyed with the San Francisco 49ers this offseason. With the Brandon Ayuk drama, Trent Williams drama. I mean, they've had too many issues to say that this team is coming in full swing. Brandon Ayuk didn't practice, Trent Williams was holding out. I could see this team having some issues. But of course, the team is still really good. Mentioning those 2 players, you've also got George Kittle, Deebo Samuel. Brock Purdy is a very good quarterback who is underrated. On the defense, Fred Warner, you've got Nick Bosa. You've got plenty of players on this team that are going to be elite. With that being said, in this week, I will be taking the New York Jets to play and win this game. The main reason behind it is I think that the San Francisco 49ers are going to suffer from not having both Brandon Ayuk and Trent Williams in their offseason practices. It's going to be a little bit more of a hodgepodge. They've got a little bit more time to figure things out since it's Monday Night Football. I think there will be some issues on the field, and that the Jets will bring a cleaner and better group with them to this game. And that's not to say that the Niners will be bad. I just think they need a little bit more time to ease into the season.